Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and the Bell That Rang, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Bell Rang Twice. The bell rang once, a low, mournful toll that echoed through the ancient chapel like a cry from the grave. A moment later, it rang again, and that was the moment Lady Wilhelmina Carroway collapsed at the altar, eyes frozen in terror, lips moving in a silent scream. The congregation gasped. The organist stopped mid-hymn, and from the far end of the pews, Hercule Poirot slowly rose, his eyes already narrowing, not in fear, but in fierce, quiet calculation. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered to himself, his voice nearly drowned by the rush of murmurs and the sudden thunder outside. Something most unnatural has occurred. Candles flickered in the gust of cold wind that blew through the heavy chapel doors. Outside, rain battered the stone roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside, the crucifix above the altar cast a shadow that seemed, just for a second, to smirk. Poirot's mind raced, not with panic, but with order, precision, the way a clockwork mechanism might spring to life. He had not heard that second bell by accident. No, it was deliberate, controlled, timed, and if it rang again, there would be more than death. The priest stumbled forward, kneeling beside Lady Carroway's body. She simply fell, he stammered. Her heart, perhaps. Poirot approached. The woman's body was sprawled unnaturally, her gloved hand clenched tight around something hidden within the folds of her dress. Her eyes, still open, stared at the bell tower above. Poirot noted the faintest hint of foam on her lips. Poison, perhaps, or fright. Behind him, the crowd of mourners shifted like waves in a storm. Among them, Sir Miles Carroway, the grieving husband, whose eyes were dry but hands trembled. Then there was Judith Penhollow, Lady Carroway's much younger sister, always so perfectly composed, so quietly observant. And finally, the estate's steward, Mr. Edwin Marsh, a man whose loyalty had always seemed too absolute, too rehearsed. Each one looked at Lady Carroway's body with something different in their expression. Not grief, not exactly. Poirot saw something more dangerous. Calculation, relief, and in one pair of eyes, guilt. He leaned forward and gently pried open her hand. Inside, a crumpled piece of vellum, damp from sweat. The ink smudged, but legible. You must ring the bell. Twice. Ah. Poirot turned slowly toward the congregation. His gaze swept over them with the precision of a surgeon. I regret to inform you, he said softly, that this was no natural death. Someone here wished Lady Carroway to die at the sound of that second bell. Gasps. One woman fainted. The organist began to sob. Sir Miles stepped forward. Now see here, my wife was ill. Her nerves, her heart, it's all in her doctor's record. Poirot smiled gently. Mais oui, but did her doctor advise that she avoid church bells? No answer. That night, the storm thickened. Poirot remained at the estate, per Lady Carroway's own request, delivered quite strangely just the day before her death. in her own handwriting, "If anything should happen to me, please invite Monsieur Poirot." Why had she feared for her life? In the drawing room, Poirot sat across from the three central figures. Sir Miles, a man of wealth but no warmth, lit his cigar with a trembling hand. "My wife had a fragile mind, Monsieur Poirot. Surely she imagined danger where there was none." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet she imagined it precisely to the hour of her death. That requires more than an imagination, monsieur. That requires foreknowledge." Sir Miles bristled. "Are you accusing me?" "I accuse no one. Not yet. I observe." Judith Penhallow, dressed in mourning black that only accentuated her poise, leaned forward. "Wilhelmina and I were not close, but I loved her in my way. She was difficult, suspicious, always hearing whispers, always terrified someone would— What was her word? Take everything." Poirot sipped his tea. "And did you wish to take everything?" Judith's lips curved. "If I did, wouldn't I have married Sir Miles myself?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps you tried." The steward, Edwin Marsh, remained silent. He watched Poirot with cautious eyes, loyal eyes, but loyalty, Poirot knew, was just another form of concealment. That night, Poirot paced the chapel alone. The bell tower loomed above like a watchful sentinel. Rain slicked the floor. He examined the pull rope, the cord still damp from recent use. But it wasn't frayed. It hadn't snapped. Someone had pulled it. Twice. But why twice? And then he saw it. A scuff mark on the marble beside the bell rope. A size 6 shoe. Feminine. And nearby, a faint impression of a button. Pearl. Fallen, perhaps, in haste. Judith wore pearls. But Judith was not the only one. Poirot walked the grounds. The Caraway estate was vast, bordered by cliffs and forest. It was then, among the hedgerows, that he saw a lantern moving in the distance. He followed quietly. Judith stood by the old gardener's shed, her gloved hands pulling a package from beneath the floorboards. Poirot stepped out of the shadows. "Forgive me, mademoiselle. Were you expecting someone else?" She froze. I was just looking for this?" Poirot held up a photograph he'd taken from Lady Caraway's study. It showed Judith, Sir Miles, and Wilhelmina. But it was what had been cut from the corner that mattered most. A fourth person had stood there once, someone they no longer wanted to remember. "Lady Caraway had secrets," Poirot said. "One of them was why she kept that photograph hidden. The other was what she knew about the bell." In the following days, Poirot examined the will. Wilhelmina had recently made changes. If she died, all would go not to Sir Miles, but to Judith. Unless, of course, the death was unnatural. But what if it appeared natural? Poison could be masked. The bell ringing could act as a trigger, a psychological weapon. If Wilhelmina believed death would come with the sound, then her own heart might have sealed the deal. But someone had known that. Someone had counted on it. Then came the twist. Poirot sat in the library, alone, with Edwin Marsh. "You've been loyal a long time, monsieur, but not to the Caraways." The steward blinked. "What do you mean?" Poirot held up a letter, written in the same hand as the vellum note. "I compared the ink, the curve of the R, dot the paper stock. You wrote the warning to Lady Caraway. You told her to ring the bell twice." Edwin's face turned pale. I was trying to help her. She was going mad. She thought her sister and husband were plotting. I told her, if she felt threatened, she should ring the bell as a signal." Poirot nodded. "And she believed you But someone else used that knowledge against her. The final blow came with the post-mortem. Traces of atropine, belladonna, were found in her system, administered in tea, a slow-acting toxin, but lethal. The emotional shock of the bell had merely been the final push. Poirot gathered them all in the chapel. Sir Miles, Judith, Edwin. "The killer is among us," he said calmly. "One who used the sound of faith to orchestrate death." Sir Miles stepped forward. "It was Judith. She hated my wife. She wanted the inheritance." Judith's eyes flashed. "He lies. He seduced me for years, but wouldn't leave her." Poirot raised a hand. "Both of you are guilty, but not of murder. Of betrayal, oui. Of resentment, but not of death." He turned. "It was Edwin," gasps. "He wrote the note, poisoned the tea, but not from hate, from misguided love." Poirot stepped closer. "You were Lady Carraway's illegitimate half-brother, the missing figure in the photo, cast out, hidden, but you loved her and feared for her. You tried to protect her, but when she began to unravel, you believed death was mercy." Edwin wept. "She was suffering. I didn't mean—" Poirot's voice was quiet. "Mercy is not yours to give." Outside, the storm cleared. But in Poirot's mind, the storm never truly ended. It merely passed. For now. As he turned from the chapel, he whispered to himself, "Ah, but it is always the second sound, the second warning, that reveals the truth. The first is only to deceive." The bell never rang again, and the silence it left behind was far louder. Chapter 2. Blood on the Brass Handle. The scream came just as the grandfather clock struck midnight, piercing, ragged, and so raw it sliced the silence like a scalpel through skin. It echoed down the tiled corridor of Marchmont Hall, bouncing off the ancient wood-panelled walls until it reached the drawing-room where Hercule Poirot sat perfectly still, the flicker of the fireplace dancing in his eyes. He did not rise immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as if listening to the scream's fading vibrations. And then slowly, with the grace of a man who has seen too many screams lead to too much death, he stood and made his way toward the west wing. At the end of the corridor, a door hung slightly ajar. The ornate brass handle, twisted into the shape of a lion's mouth, was streaked with blood. Fresh, glistening, running in a thin line down to the white wood beneath. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his breath slow. "Blood on the handle," he murmured. "But not on the floor. Curious. Très curieux." He reached for a handkerchief and gently pushed the door open, revealing the body sprawled across the carpet like a marionette with its strings cut. Lord Oswald Delmere, the patriarch of the estate, lay with eyes wide open in blank astonishment, a letter opener buried deep in his throat. The room smelled of lavender and iron. A storm raged outside. Rain lashed against the windows in frantic bursts. Poirot moved carefully, noting everything. The overturned glass near the fireplace, the faint smell of cigar smoke that did not match the victim's usual brand, the dog, Lady Winsome's terrier, whimpering beneath the writing desk, and of course, the blood on the handle. It told him more than any scream could. As footsteps rushed down the hall, Poirot turned to face the others. Lady Winsome Delmere, pale and breathless, appeared first, clutching a silk robe at her chest. Her eyes landed on her husband's corpse, and she did not scream. Instead, she staggered back against the wall, her breath hitching not from grief, but from some deeper, older emotion. Behind her came Geoffrey Marsh, Oswald's personal secretary, a quiet man with watery eyes and ink-stained cuffs. And finally, Elena Vassiliev, the late Lord's live-in nurse, her expression unreadable beneath her sharp cheekbones and impeccable calm. Poirot raised one hand. "You will forgive me. None of you shall enter further. This is now a crime scene." Lady Winsome managed a whisper. "He was alive when I went to bed. I swear to you, I heard nothing." Eleanor's voice was level, clinical. "I gave him his medication at 10. He seemed anxious. Said he felt a presence watching him." Geoffrey wrung his hands. "This can't be real. This can't. He didn't have enemies. He barely had friends." Poirot's eyes never left the brass handle. "No enemies, Monsieur Marsh. Forgive me, but Lord Delmere inherited 2 fortunes, sued his own brother, over a vineyard in France, disinherited his daughter, and purchased 3 estates in disputed auctions. He was not a man untouched by conflict. The silence that followed was not disagreement. It was fear. Poirot could feel it in the way the rain seemed to pause, the way time itself stretched. Already the scent of suspicion lingered heavier than the perfume in the air. By morning, Scotland Yard had arrived, but Poirot insisted on remaining. It was not pride, it was instinct. There was something deeply wrong with the way the blood had been placed. Not spilled, placed. He interviewed each suspect in turn. Lady Winsome, still regal despite the tragedy, admitted her marriage had grown distant. Her husband had become paranoid, she said, checking the locks twice, refusing to sleep in the same room. And yet, when Poirot asked what medication he was on, she hesitated. "Elena would know. I don't involve myself in such details." "Ah," Poirot said quietly, "and is that what you say about your finances as well?" She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The accounts your husband recently sealed. Your allowance halved, yet you remained here, loyal and silent." Her silence was answer enough. Geoffrey Marsh, on the other hand, appeared broken. "I was in the library all evening. You can ask the staff. I was writing letters for him. Important legal documents. He wanted them posted tomorrow." Poirot raised a brow. "May I see these letters?" I burnt them. He told me to." "You burnt legal documents at his instruction?" "I swear it. He said no one must see them. Not yet. He was afraid something would happen." And Poirot noticed the tremor. Not fear. Not grief. Guilt. But it was Eleanor who intrigued him most. "You are not British, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "No, Monsieur Poirot." "Russian?" "My father was a doctor. I trained in St. Petersburg before the revolution." "And yet you chose to remain in service to one man, far from home, in a country where you are not accepted easily." "I go where I am needed. But your service here began only after Lord Delmere's previous nurse left suddenly. Some say she fled." Eleanor's eyes darkened. She was dismissed. She knew too much about the estate, about his past. Poirot's voice lowered. "Did you also know too much, mademoiselle?" She didn't answer, but her hand trembled, only for a second. In the days that followed, Poirot wandered the estate. He noted the muddy footprint outside the study, distinctive, feminine, but too small for Lady Winsome's dainty heels. He observed the arrangement of Lord Delmere's books, one volume missing from the shelf, later found under the dog's blanket, stained with blood. He listened to the household staff whisper about inheritance, about threats, about a daughter sent away to boarding school who had not returned for 10 years. And then came the first twist. A letter arrived, postmarked 3 days earlier, addressed to Lady Winsome. Inside, a page torn from a journal, Lord Delmere's handwriting. If anything happens to me, look at the handle. Blood will tell you what I could not say. Poirot stared at it for hours. Then he returned to the study. He studied the lion-shaped brass handle again. He realized the blood was not random. It had been smeared in a specific motion. A shape. A letter. An E. Elena. Poirot called everyone to the library. He stood by the fireplace, calm, collected, the air thick with tension. "You believe the killer is among you," he began. "You are correct. But who? The widow with a motive? The secretary with burned papers? Or the nurse with too many secrets?" They watched him, frozen. Poirot continued, "Lord Delmere feared for his life, and so he planned something quite clever. He left us a message, a smear of blood in the shape of a letter." Geoffrey stood. "You think it was Elena?" Elena shook her head. He was confused, hallucinating. "He wouldn't—" Poirot held up a hand. "Ah, non, that is the red herring. You see, it wasn't Eleanor." He turned to Lady Winsome. "It was you." She gasped. Poirot's voice was soft, but deadly. "You entered the study before anyone else. You found him still alive, dying. You smeared the blood yourself to implicate Elena. Because you knew about the inheritance. You knew the new will, the one Geoffrey burned, left everything to a daughter he'd found again, a daughter from his first marriage." A stunned silence, and then a voice from the doorway. "I'm right here," said a young woman, her voice trembling. All heads turned. A girl, no older than 20, stepped into the room. Poirot nodded. Mademoiselle Claire, his daughter, from a long-forgotten affair, raised in secrecy. He brought her back weeks ago, hoped to reconcile. Lady Winsome's face twisted. "He was going to give her everything, after everything I sacrificed, after the years I endured his cruelty." "You sacrificed nothing," Poirot said coldly. "You poisoned him slowly for weeks. And when he survived, you tried again. You stabbed him, then painted Eleanor as the villain. But you underestimated one thing." "What?" Poirot pointed at the brass handle. "The lion always bites the hand that bleeds." She was taken away in silence. Outside, the storm had passed. The air was heavy, damp with secrets and sorrow. Poirot stood alone, in the study, watching the blood dry on the lion's mouth. He whispered, "In the end, it is not the blood that reveals the killer. It is the desperation to control the story. But the truth, it always seeps through. Even brass cannot hold it back." He straightened his cuffs, picked up his hat, and walked out, leaving the echo of the scream, the blood, and the brass behind him. Chapter 3. The woman in green vanished. It was just past dusk when the woman in green stepped onto the gravel path behind the Caraway Chapel and was never seen again. A single witness, the old sexton, claimed to have seen her figure glide past the row of crumbling gravestones, one hand trailing across the cold stone as if reading the names by touch. Then came a sound, not quite a cry, not quite a breath, a sigh swallowed by the trees, and she vanished. The evening fog descended like a curtain, and the path beyond the cemetery wall remained untouched, unmarked, and unnervingly silent. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the path the next morning, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his moustache twitching ever so slightly in the chill air. He was not a man prone to romantic illusions, but there was something peculiar in the hush of this place, something wrong. It was not merely a disappearance, it was a disappearance designed, performed almost, with precision. "There is, you see," he murmured to himself, "no such thing as a person vanishing. There is only a person hidden with motive, with calculation, and whoever hid her had practiced." The woman's name was Evelyn Fairfax, 27, unmarried. A governess until recently. She had arrived at the Carraway estate a mere 5 days ago, invited by Lord Marchland, the cousin of the late Lady Wilhelmina Carraway. Evelyn was said to be quiet, soft-spoken, elegant. Her manners, and always dressed in a peculiar shade of green, forest, rich and vivid against the greys of the village. The staff called her the Whisper in Emerald. And now she was gone. The constable, a thick-skulled man named Rigby, stood near Poirot, his boots caked with mud. Probably left on her own. London girl by the sound. You know how they are. Moody, flighty, prone to hysteria. Poirot turned his head slowly, one brow arched so perfectly it might have cut glass. She packed no bags. She left no note. She walked into mist, not toward it. You do not believe in hysteria, mon cher Rigby. You excuse your laziness with it. From the great manor house, 3 faces watched. Lord Marchland, proud and hollow-eyed. Helena Ashcroft, his niece, barely 21 and already too poised. And Julian Locksley, the estate's archivist, a man who lived among papers and secrets and liked it that way. All had spoken with Evelyn. All had reasons to wish her gone. Inside, the drawing-room, Poirot paced beneath a chandelier that swayed ever so slightly from a draught no one could locate. "The key, I think," he said aloud, "is not why she vanished. It is why she came." Helena, draped in velvet, the color of ash, studied him with narrowed eyes. She was here to help catalogue Aunt Wilhelmina's possessions, nothing more. "Then why," Poirot replied, "was she asking about the bells, the ones that rang before Lady Wilhelmina's death?" Silence. Julian Locksley's cup rattled in its saucer. Poirot moved closer. Evelyn Fairfax made inquiries. "About you, Mademoiselle Helena? About Lord Marchland's financial troubles? About the missing ledger in the chapel records?" Marchland stood abruptly. She had no right. She was a guest, not an interrogator. And yet she was a woman with a reason to question. "I found her notebook, hidden in her drawer. It contains 3 names, yours, Monsieur, and Helena's, and Julian's, underlined with the word confession." Julian Locksley swallowed hard. "It's not what it seems. She was asking strange things. About the chapel, yes. About the foundations. The old crypt. She said something was buried." Poirot froze. "Buried?" "She said she could hear something beneath the floorboards, whispering, like voices trapped under stone." The room chilled. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "She heard the past, monsieur, and the past is rarely silent." He returned to the chapel. This time, alone. The candlelight flickered against the stained glass windows, and the echo of each step lingered too long. Poirot paused by the altar where he had stood 2 nights ago after Lady Wilhelmina's death. He stared down at the flagstone floor. His fingers brushed one edge, smooth, polished, but just before it, a tiny chip, new, from a tool or a fingernail. Kneeling, he pressed his palm flat, cold stone. But below it, yes, a breath of hollow. Poirot did not smile. "So, you were digging, mademoiselle? But why?" He called in a stonemason from the village under pretense of repair. Within the hour, The stone was lifted. Beneath it, a shallow recess. Inside, a small, velvet-lined box. Empty. Poirot closed it carefully. "She found something," he whispered. Or she saw who already had. That night, Poirot invited them all to dine. Lord Marchland drank too heavily. His voice was loud, insistent. "My wife left nothing of value. Nothing. She died with debts, regrets, and a name barely respected." Julian Locksley countered quietly, "Yet you keep her chapel untouched. You refuse to sell the land to the parish. Why?" Helena turned to Poirot. "You think one of us harmed Evelyn?" He did not answer. Instead, he asked softly, "Did you know she had been here before?" The table stiffened. Poirot nodded. 3 years ago, under a different name, employed briefly by the Ashcroft family, dismissed without cause. And you, Helena, were a girl of 18. Do you remember what she found then?" Helena's fork dropped. The second twist fell like thunder. Poirot stepped toward the hearth and tossed in a folded sheet. Flames swallowed it, but not before Julian Locksley gasped. "That's the map, the old estate diagram." "Oui," Poirot said, "with the crypt marked, and the name of Lady Wilhelmina's first child, Erica, crossed out. No one speaks of Erica. She died, yes? At birth?" "No," Helena whispered. "She vanished." Lord Marchland erupted. "That's enough. She was illegitimate. A scandal buried decades ago." Poirot's voice cut through like a blade. "Buried, monsieur? Like the box beneath the chapel?" He let silence fall. "Evelyn Fairfax came here for truth. She discovered something that was never meant to be uncovered. Not money, not jewels, but bloodline, inheritance. A child thought lost, perhaps not lost at all." Julian muttered, "But then where is she now?" Poirot closed his eyes. "Dead. Killed the night she found proof. Disposed of quietly. Perhaps hidden among the gravestones, where the fog conceals everything. And no one saw her go, because she never left." Helena stood, shaking. "You can't prove that." "Non," Poirot said, opening his eyes. "But I do not need to, because I already know who did it." He turned. "Julian." The archivist froze. "You told me she was asking questions about the crypt, yet no one else knew. You burned the old maps. You changed the chapel records. And in Evelyn's notebook, the last word, scribbled in haste, was Locksley. You killed her because she uncovered the truth. That Erica survived. That she lived, hidden under another name. And that the heir to the Caraway estate is not Lord Marchland. It is Evelyn, or rather, was." Julian broke. "She wasn't supposed to find it. I thought she'd leave. I tried to frighten her. Then she found the box. I had no choice." "You always have a choice," Poirot said coldly. "Even murder is a choice." The authorities retrieved the body the next morning, beneath the third stone in the oldest row of graves. Evelyn, her green dress damp and torn, her hand still clutching a scrap of the diagram she'd copied in pencil. The true heir, silenced. Poirot stood at the chapel's threshold, watching as they lifted her from the grave she never belonged in. He touched his hat. "Ah, mademoiselle," he whispered. "You vanished. Yes, but not because you were weak, because you were right." And then, to the empty air, to no one and everyone. It is always the same. The past, so heavy, so buried, will rise again. And when it does, it demands to be heard, even if the voice must speak from the grave. Chapter 4. Locked room, open window. The maid dropped the tea tray when she saw the blood. It splattered in an arc across the white wallpaper, dark and drying, trailing toward the carpet as if it had been flung by something or someone desperate. Sir Archibald Grant lay slumped in his reading chair, a single bullet wound between his eyes. The pistol rested by his slippered foot. The study door was locked from the inside. The only exit, the window behind him, stood wide open. Rainwater trickling in from the night storm, the curtains shivering in the wind. And yet, 3 stories high, with no ledge, no climbable surface, and no signs of a break-in. It was, as the housekeeper whispered to herself in horror, the perfect suicide, except he had no reason to die. Poirot arrived precisely 14 minutes after the constable, his overcoat pristine despite the weather, his moustache curled to its usual perfection. He took one glance at the scene, at the body, the gun, the open window, and without touching a thing, muttered to himself, "Non, non, non, trop propre, too clean, too final." His eyes, like polished glass, swept the room, the teacup untouched, the newspaper folded twice, the ash in the tray disturbed. The man's slippers were on, yet his cane was still by the door. "Mon ami," Poirot whispered, "you did not intend to die sitting down, did you?" Sir Archibald Grant was no ordinary man. A retired colonial judge, revered in public, feared in private. His name commanded respect, but his past was shrouded in shadows. Allegations of judicial manipulation in Calcutta, rumors of an affair with a married woman that ended in tragedy, and whispers that he had recently altered his will. And now he was dead, alone, in a locked room, with the window open to a rainstorm that no sane man would welcome. Poirot turned to the suspects, now gathered in the drawing room like chess pieces arranged for a final game. Lady Cynthia Grant, his widow, brittle and sharp-eyed, her mourning veil already in place. Graham Alcott, the late Sir Archibald's nephew and sole heir until just last week, and Eloise Martin, the young nurse hired only 2 months ago, whose gentle demeanor masked an air of studied neutrality. Poirot's voice was soft as he studied each face. "Tell me, did anyone hear the shot?" "No," Cynthia said. "But the storm, who could have? Thunder every few minutes. I thought I heard a crash, but I assumed it was the wind." Graham, tall, nervous, with ink-stained fingers, nodded too quickly. "Same for me. I was in the library. The storm muffled everything." Eloise lowered her gaze. "I was in the greenhouse. Sir Archibald insisted I leave him alone in the evenings." Poirot raised a brow. "Insisted, mademoiselle, or warned?" She hesitated. "He had secrets. He was a difficult man." Poirot's smile was thin. A man with secrets often leaves them behind in others. Act 2 began not with a clue, but with a contradiction. The pistol. It had been wiped clean. Not by rain, not by panic, but with a cloth. The housekeeper found the cloth stuffed behind the radiator, damp with oil. Fingerprints smudged deliberately, not absent entirely. Poirot examined the gun himself, noting that it had been fired, but no powder marks were on the man's hand. A clear sign. "So," he whispered to himself, "he did not shoot himself. And if he did not shoot himself, then someone else did. But how? In a locked room?" Poirot returned to the study and examined the window again. Rain poured in, the sill soaked, but on the outside edge, just before the drop, one faint scuff, the kind a leather shoe might make, but no ladder, no rope, no climbing marks on the wall. Poirot leaned forward. "Ah," Not from the outside at all, he said softly, but to the outside. He called for Graham Alcott. Your uncle, Poirot said, was preparing to change his will again. We? Graham paled. Yes. I wasn't to receive anything. He said I was a failure. Poirot tilted his head. So you forged the new will? Graham blinked. No. I thought about it. I drafted something, but I didn't act. I swear. Where is this draft? In the wastebasket, he mumbled. He found it and burned it in front of me. Poirot made no expression, but he noted the tremor in the young man's jaw, the flush at his collar. Guilt of something. Then he asked Eloise, the nurse, about the medication. Was Sir Archibald on sedatives? Yes, mild ones. He struggled to sleep. Any administered last night? No, she said too quickly, then corrected herself. Not by me. Poirot turned slowly. Who then? The question hung in the air like a knife. That night, Poirot conducted a quiet experiment. He entered the study, locked the door, opened the window, and recreated the scene. Not with a body, but with shadows. He used a mannequin, borrowed from the tailor. He adjusted the lighting, mimicking the storm. Then he dropped to the floor, peered beneath the desk, and whispered, Voila. The next morning, he summoned everyone to the study. I will show you now, he began, how the impossible murder occurred. Cynthia raised an eyebrow. Do you mean the suicide? Poirot's gaze snapped to hers. No, madame. I mean the execution. He walked slowly to the window. This was never a locked room. Not truly, for the key to such puzzles is not the lock, but the perception of it. The killer wanted us to believe this room was sealed, when in fact, it was not. He pointed to the curtain rope. The killer tied a thin wire to the trigger of the gun. From outside the window, standing on the second-floor balcony of the adjacent library, they pulled it. The angle was right, the trajectory perfect. Sir Archibald was already unconscious, poisoned earlier, perhaps in his tea. The shot fired. The pistol dropped. The wire was reeled back. The only thing left open was the window. The illusion of isolation was complete. Gasps filled the room. Cynthia turned pale. Who would go to such effort? Poirot faced her. Someone who knew the room, knew the house, knew when the storm would drown the noise. Someone who had access to the balcony and a reason to silence Sir Archibald before he changed his will again. All eyes turned to Graham, but Poirot smiled gently. No, it was not Graham. He turned to Eloise. It was you. She froze. Poirot continued. Your real name is Eloise Kendall. You are the daughter of Vera Kendall, the woman Sir Archibald ruined 30 years ago. Your mother, married and disgraced, took her own life. You were orphaned, sent to a convent, and you waited for decades until you trained as a nurse, until you could come here and finish what he started. Eloise's face was a mask of silence. Poirot walked toward her, slow and soft. He remembered. Your mother. He recognized the name, didn't he? He became afraid you would expose him. He planned to confess, to change his will, but you were faster. Tears welled in her eyes. He destroyed her. He laughed about it in his letters. I read them, and no one punished him. Poirot nodded. And now he has been punished. By you. Poetic, perhaps, but still, murder. Eloise was led away in silence. Poirot stood by the open window, letting the wind graze his face, and then softly, to no one at all. Revenge always finds its moment. But justice, it takes patience. The locked room was not the puzzle. The puzzle was the pain that no key could unlock. Chapter 5. Midnight Footsteps on Stone. The first footstep rang out at precisely 12 minutes past midnight, sharp, deliberate, and echoing too loudly for the silence it disturbed. The second followed, lighter, yet somehow more terrifying, as if the stone beneath it recoiled. Mrs. Larch, the housekeeper at Aldwych Manor, sat bolt upright in her bed beneath the rafters, breath caught in her throat. No one was supposed to be walking the inner cloister at that hour. No one living, and yet the sound went on. Tap, 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 across the centuries-old flagstones, weaving through arches where moonlight pooled in ghostly shapes. By the time Hercule Poirot opened his eyes in the guest suite just above the cloister, he was already calculating, already assembling questions no one else would ask. A midnight walker, a cloister paved with secrets. And then before dawn, a body. The body was found just past the east arch, slumped against the ancient stone pillar that once marked it, the entry to the private family crypt. Sir Lionel Gadsbury, patriarch, historian, and master of Aldwych, lay with his head tilted unnaturally, his eyes open to the stars. No visible wounds, no sign of struggle, just a smear of blood at his temple and a look of profound surprise on his face, as if death had whispered something just before taking him. His slippers were dry, his robe unruffled, and in his hand a single brass key. Poirot knelt beside the body, candlelight from the nearby sconce, casting flickering shadows over his pale skin. He did not touch the key. Instead, his eyes moved slowly across the scene. The dust disturbed in a crescent, a tiny thread caught in the edge of a cracked flagstone, a faint indentation in the earth, near the pillar's base. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "A man walks in slippers and leaves no footprints, yet someone else walks after him and disappears." The suspects were few but tangled. Edith Gadsbury, Sir Lionel's only child, widowed at 30, returned to the estate after years in Florence with an art collection and a drinking problem. Nathaniel Hearn, the family solicitor, quiet, calculating, and loyal, at least outwardly, and Madeline Bourne, a scholar staying as a guest to catalogue the estate's medieval texts, whose intelligence was matched only by her aloofness. Each had access, each had motive, and each claimed to have heard nothing at all during the hour of the murder. Poirot sat in the breakfast room with Edith, who had taken to pouring her brandy with tea. "You did not hear the footsteps?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, but I rarely sleep. The bells wake me. They chime every quarter hour from the old tower." "Ah, but not last night," Poirot replied. "The bell is cracked, you see. It hasn't rung in weeks. Only someone pretending to sleep would say such a thing." She blinked, then smiled faintly. "You think I killed my father?" "I think you lied," Poirot said, "which is not the same thing. One conceals guilt, the other, grief." Poirot's mind turned to the key. It opened something, and Sir Lionel clutched it in death like a final clue. But the manor had dozens of locked places, storerooms, trunks, crypts, cabinets. It was not until he visited the family library, a vast Gothic room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, that he noticed a small wooden drawer behind the grandfather clock, barely visible unless the sun hit just right. The lock was brass. The key turned with an audible click. Inside, a photograph, yellowed and torn, of a woman in a green gown, standing in the cloister at night. Her face turned slightly, half in shadow, and beneath it, a scrap of parchment. She walks, even now, where no light falls. Ask the stones. They remember. Poirot closed the drawer slowly. So, it is not the first time. Back in the hallway, he met Nathaniel Hearn. You were the last person to see Sir Lionel alive, yes? The solicitor nodded. He asked me to bring him the new will. He intended to sign it this morning. Why wait? He wanted to walk first. He always said the cloister cleared his mind. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And what changed in the new will? Nathaniel hesitated. He disinherited Edith. Everything was to go to the estate. Converted into a historical trust, he believed Alderwich belonged to history. Then someone disagreed. Later, Poirot walked the cloister himself, counting the stones, listening to the wind curl around arches. And then he found it, the sixth stone from the pillar, slightly raised. He bent, brushed away dust. Beneath it, bare earth, a hidden compartment, long undisturbed, and within it, a bundle of old letters, bound with black silk. He did not open them then. He did not need to. That evening, the rain began. It came softly, like breath, and turned the cloister into a mirror of wet stone. Poirot sat alone, watching the arches through the window, waiting, and just before midnight, the footsteps returned. Tap, 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 slow, measured, real, but no one visible, no shadow, no shape, and yet the sound unmistakable. Poirot smiled grimly. The next morning, he gathered everyone in the chapel, where secrets always seem to end. The question, he began, was never how Sir Lionel died. It was why. Silence. He was not struck. He was frightened into cardiac arrest. The blow to the head came from the fall. But what frightened him? Poirot stepped forward. A ghost? No. Something better. Something he believed was a ghost. He turned to Edith. You were disinherited. You had reason to stop him, but you didn't. She held her head high. No, I found out, but I said nothing. I couldn't stop him from ruining the estate, but I wouldn't kill him. Poirot nodded, then faced Madeleine Bourne. And you, mademoiselle, were cataloguing documents, including the letters I found beneath the cloister. Love letters from your grandmother, the woman in the green dress, Sir Lionel's first and only true love. She paled. He left her, married into wealth. He thought she died. She did not. She raised a child. Your mother. Gasps echoed. Poirot's voice was soft. You are not just a guest. You are family, a Gadsbury. And you came not for history, but for justice. You walked the cloister in your grandmother's gown. You let the echo play tricks. You knew he took that path every night. When he saw you, he thought she had returned from the grave, and it killed him. I never touched him, Madeleine whispered. I just wanted him to remember. You did, Poirot replied. He remembered everything, and it killed him. The room was still. Poirot turned to the altar, where the morning light streamed through stained glass. He folded his hands. The footsteps were real, but so was the guilt. We speak of ghosts as if they are shadows, but often they are flesh and blood, carrying pain and seeking peace. And then softly, to himself, ah, but the stones, they do remember. Every step, every secret, even those we try to forget. Chapter 6. A note that wasn't there. The paper was folded precisely in half, sitting at the center of the dead man's desk, like an accusation in ink. It hadn't been there when the constable arrived. It hadn't been there when the butler found the body. But now, not an hour later, it sat in full view, plain as prophecy. "You know who I am," the note read, written in tight, deliberate script. "And now they will too. No signature, no fingerprints, no explanation." The desk was locked, the window barred, the study untouched. The man, Dr. Algernon Kettering, professor of languages, expert in ancient texts, and a man known for his meticulous order, was very much dead, slumped in his chair with a broken neck and a spilled glass of sherry by his foot. But the note wasn't there before. And now it was. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway, his silhouette cutting sharply against the afternoon light that filtered in through stained glass windows. The Manor's west wing was dark, the electricity inconsistent, and the scent of old books and older secrets hung in the air. He stepped toward the desk, eyes never leaving the paper. "Très intéressant," he murmured, not touching the note. "The handwriting is not hurried. The corners are clean, no tremble in the pen stroke, but the message, it is pure threat, carefully delivered." "Except," said Inspector Dale, clearing his throat uncomfortably, "that note wasn't there when we checked. The desk, I swear it, and the door was locked until we opened it." Poirot turned slowly. "So it was added after death, or before and hidden, but not by accident. No, this note wanted to be found." The room was silent. Poirot turned to the gathered suspects, who had all been in the house during the time of death and who, quite inconveniently, all had ties to the deceased. There was Miss Isabel Kettering, the professor's daughter, pale and sharp-witted, her fingers shaking, just slightly as she clutched a silver locket. Then there was Mr. Bernard Lathrop, his former assistant, dismissed 2 months earlier for reasons never explained. His voice was calm, but his hands bore calluses from typewriter keys. And finally, there was Reverend Samuel Blythe, the local vicar, a friend of the professor's for over 20 years, whose sermons were gentle and whose eyes now burned with something more than sorrow. The death was not natural. That much was clear. The sherry showed traces of scopolamine, a paralyzing agent that did not kill but disoriented, enough to cause a fall. But the fall did not break the neck. Poirot noted that instantly. The break was too clean. A twist, not gravity, murder. Miss Kettering said she had been in the garden at the time of death. "I went out to get air," she said. "Father had been restless all week. I couldn't stand the silence." Bernard claimed he had come to return a manuscript the professor had loaned him years ago. "He was always difficult," he said flatly, "but I never wanted him dead." Reverend Blythe merely closed his eyes. He had secrets. We all do. But this I did not expect. Poirot observed each carefully. Edith had no ink stains, but her locket bore a smear of wax, sealing wax. Bernard's coat was dry, yet his boots were muddy, as if he had changed before entering. The Reverend's Bible, tucked under his arm, was missing pages, 6 in total, carefully torn. The time. Poirot nodded slowly. "And your father?" "He wrote things he never published. Letters. He said one day they'd be too dangerous to print." Bernard confirmed it. "He kept a drawer of them. Locked. He called it his past life. I assumed it was personal." Poirot returned to the study late that evening, alone. The wind outside howled against the trees, and the shadows seemed to lean closer in the flickering candlelight. He opened the professor's journal, scanned the final entries. The last one, dated 3 days before the murder, was only a single line. "It's not guilt, if no one knows, but I am tired of silence." The next morning, Poirot summoned the suspects to the library. On the table before him, the note, the professor's journal, and a single silver key, the one recovered from the lining of the professor's robe. Poirot spoke softly. "We are taught to believe that the truth must leave evidence, but sometimes it is the absence that is loudest." Turned to Bernard. "You knew about the letters. You were afraid of them." Bernard stiffened. "I thought he was losing his mind. He talked to himself. He said names I didn't recognize." Poirot nodded. "Because they were names of men he had destroyed. He once testified against a group of students accused of heresy in Rome. His testimony condemned 3 of them, all executed, and one of them was your father." Bernard's face darkened. "He never admitted it. He wrote about it. He kept the letters from the trial, signed confessions taken under pressure. You found them the night before his death. You confronted him." "No, I never." Poirot raised a hand. "You threatened him, but you didn't kill him." All eyes turned to Isabelle. Poirot did not. Instead, he looked at the Reverend. "You, mon père, were not here to pray. You were here because you, too, knew the truth. You tried to persuade him to go public, to confess." Blythe bowed his head. "He wouldn't. He said his legacy was worth more than justice." "And so," Poirot continued, "he wrote the note. He wrote the confession, but it was not found." "Because it wasn't there," Bernard said bitterly. "Ah," Poirot said, "but it was, just not in the way you expected." He turned to Isabelle. "You removed the original, hid it, replaced it with the one we found." Her lips parted. No, He gave you the key. You took the real letter from the drawer, replaced it with your own. A vague threat that meant nothing, but it misled us, until I found the sealing wax on your locket. You resealed the envelope, but the color was different. Your wax was silver. His was black. She stared at him, trembling. Poirot stepped forward. "You loved your father, and you hated what he had done, but you wanted to preserve him. You couldn't bear for the world to see him as a coward." "I thought I was protecting him," she whispered. Poirot's voice was gentle. "But truth, mademoiselle, is like a letter misplaced. It always reappears." He laid the real note on the table. It was in the Bible, tucked between the missing pages. The Reverend hid it, hoping to reveal it at the right time. But truth waits for no one. In the end, no one was arrested. For once, Poirot had no murder weapon to present. The death had been accidental, compounded by guilt, paralyzed by poison, sealed by secrets. But the lies, the forged note, and the stolen confession had nearly buried a history that screamed to be heard. Poirot stood alone in the study that night, watching the candle flicker against the bookshelves. And then softly, he whispered, "The greatest lies, they do not require fire or weapon, only ink, and a hand that dares to write what should not be forgotten." The room fell silent once more, but on the desk, where the note once sat, there now remained a truth that no one could erase. Chapter 7. The Gardener's Shaking Hands. The old gardener's hands trembled so violently, the pruning shears slipped from his grip and clattered to the gravel, slicing through the morning calm with a sound that didn't belong. His eyes, small, watery, rimmed red from sleepless nights, were fixed on the yew hedge that bordered the Caraway Estate's east lawn. "It rang," he whispered. "It rang, but no one pulled the rope." Hercule Poirot had seen many men tremble, from guilt, from shock, from fear. But this tremble, This was something more. A soul trying to forget what the body refused to unsee. Poirot crouched beside him, gently retrieving the shears. He looked not at the tool, but at the dirt beneath it. There, pressed faintly into the moist earth, was a boot print. Not the gardener's. It was too narrow, too sharp in the heel. Poirot's voice was soft, but laced with purpose. "Tell me, mon ami, when did you hear the bell?" The gardener, Elias Moore, exhaled with difficulty. "Just before dawn, monsieur. Same as the day Lady Caraway died. Same number of rings, 2. And yet," Poirot said, "no one else heard it. And you swear you saw no one at the tower?" "No one. But I saw the shadow, tall, cloaked, just like before." He raised his shaking hand to his chest. "And when I saw it, I knew someone was going to die." Elias had served the Caraways for over 4 decades. Stoic, loyal, a man who spoke little and saw everything. Yet now, he looked like a man unmade, unraveling from the inside. Poirot knew that kind of fear. It came not from the supernatural, but from truths that were too large, too dark, to speak aloud. By breakfast, the house had learned what Elias had seen. The bell had not rung for weeks, not since Lady Wilhelmina's funeral. The tower was sealed, locked, and the rope removed. And yet that morning, its low toll had crept across the estate like a funeral whisper. And now, the housemaid Daphne was missing. She had gone to bring linens to the south attic. The footman claimed to have seen her pass the drawing room shortly before 5. She never returned. Her apron was found in the stairwell. Her shoes were wet with dew, as though she had been outside. But the doors were locked from within. Poirot stood in the attic corridor, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning not just the space, but its silence. "There are ghosts," Hastings would say, he murmured. But Poirot, he does not believe in ghosts, only in mistakes. The suspects gathered like clockwork. Lord Marchland, now host of the estate, whose composure frayed just slightly at the edges when pressed on Daphne's relationship with the family. Helena Ashcroft, whose every word came with precision, and whose alibi was as cold as the rain that drummed against the manor windows. And Simon Redgrave, the new estate manager, brought in after the last resigned under strange circumstances. Young, ambitious, and strangely evasive when asked about the tower keys. Poirot sat with each, listening not just to what they said, but how they said it. To Marchland. "Daphne was a child to us," he insisted. "Quiet, hard-working. She wouldn't have gone anywhere without telling someone." Poirot responded, "Yet she had recently written a letter I found, burned in the fireplace of the drawing room. The signature gone. But I recognized the ink. It was the kind kept in the steward's office." Marchland said nothing. To Helena, "Did you ever notice Daphne behaving strangely?" Helena folded her arms. "She was always watching, always listening. I suppose I would too, if I were just a maid." Poirot's brow lifted. "But not just a maid, I think. A girl with questions. Perhaps even a girl with knowledge." To Simon, "You say you were in the wine cellar during the hour in question?" "Yes," Simon said quickly. "The inventory is a mess. I've been reorganizing." Poirot nodded, slowly. "Then you will not mind if I check your shoes?" Simon hesitated, and there it was, the smallest pause, but enough. Act 2 began in the garden. Poirot returned to the boot print by the yew hedge. He matched it to Simon's right boot, a near-perfect impression. He said nothing. Instead, he walked to the bell tower. The lock was rusted, the rope removed, but the mechanism could be triggered manually. and the dust on the second stair disturbed. He found a smear of wax on the railing, pale grey, same as the candle used in the south attic. Poirot gathered his thoughts in the chapel, where light filtered through stained glass, like confessions waiting to be spoken. It wasn't just the bell. It wasn't just the vanished maid. There was a pattern. The night Lady Caraway died, the bell had rung. The night Evelyn Fairfax disappeared, the bell had rung. And now, again. Each time, someone vanished. Each time, the gardener heard it first, because Elias, poor Elias, had been placed to hear it, positioned like a pawn in someone else's game. Poirot called Elias to the study once more. "You said you saw a shadow." "I did." "Was it real, Elias? Or were you told to say it was?" The old man broke. "He said it would protect the family, that she, Lady Wilhelmina, had secrets, that Evelyn knew things she shouldn't, that Daphne found something she shouldn't have touched." "Who is he?" Elias hesitated, then said, "Lord Marchland." But Poirot didn't smile. Not yet. He turned to Marchland in the library. "You used the gardener, monsieur. Fed him visions, stories, tasks. You staged the bells ringing to distract, to frighten." Marchland's eyes narrowed. "I never told him to lie." "No," Poirot said. "You didn't need to. You suggested, and let guilt do the rest." Then he faced Helena. "You planted the wax in the attic to draw attention, but it wasn't from you." Helena said, "I don't understand." "You do," Poirot whispered. "But you are not the one who killed." Finally, he turned to Simon. "You followed Daphne that morning. You knew she had the letter. She had discovered something about the steward's accounts, hidden assets. Funds shifted to your name." Simon's face went white. "You confronted her in the attic. She ran. You struck her. She fell. You panicked. You dragged her out, through the servants' passage, to the garden, and into the shed. But she was not dead." Poirot held up a handwritten note, recovered from beneath Daphne's mattress. A will, unsigned, but in Wilhelmina's handwriting, leaving everything, not to Marchland, not to Helena, but to someone unnamed, someone whose name had been ripped from the bottom of the page. She was going to expose it all. Poirot walked to the door and opened it. Daphne stood there, alive, her head bandaged, her face pale. Gasps erupted. "She remembered, monsieur," Poirot said. "Enough to bring you to justice." Simon lunged, but 2 constables took him. And then silence. Poirot sat alone in the garden, beside the yew hedge. He looked at Elias, who now wept softly. "I didn't mean to lie," the gardener said. "I thought I was helping." Poirot placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Non, mon ami. You were used. But now you see the truth." He looked at the bell tower, silent once more, and then softly, "A bell does not kill. It warns. It tolls before the truth. And sometimes it tolls for those who pretend not to hear." The wind rustled the leaves, and the estate, for the first time in many nights, was quiet. Chapter 8. Her laughter didn't belong here. The laughter came at exactly 2:17 a.m., a high, lilting sound that sliced through the corridors of the Caraway estate like glass dragging across silk. It was a woman's laughter, light, elegant, completely out of place in the suffocating hush of morning that still clung to the manor like a funeral shroud. Daphne, the youngest maid, dropped the tea tray at the sound, porcelain shattering across stone, and froze in the corridor outside the library. "But, sir," she whispered to the footman beside her, "there's no woman awake at this hour." The only female guests had retired long before midnight. The lady of the house lay buried beneath the chapel floor. And yet, the laughter echoed again, fainter this time, but unmistakably real, and entirely wrong. By morning, Hercule Poirot stood in the very corridor where the sound had first been heard. He turned in slow contemplation, his polished shoes clicking gently against the stone as he studied the heavy tapestries, the old grandfather clock, the creases in the carpet where someone had stood and turned abruptly. "La rumeur," he said softly, "is like perfume in a room. It always leaves a trace, even if it cannot be seen." The laughter had been heard by 3 people: Daphne the maid, Simon Redgrave, the estate manager, and Francesca Lowell, the newly arrived American heiress, with a voice far too sweet for the secrets she carried. Each swore they hadn't imagined it, but no one could agree on where it came from: the corridor, the library, or, most unnervingly, the study where Lady Wilhelmina had once kept her correspondence desk, now locked. Poirot examined the lock himself. No scratches, no signs of tampering. But inside, when opened with the master key, he found a thin trail of dust, disturbed along the topmost drawer, as though something had been removed recently by a cautious hand, not stolen, but hidden. The mystery was deepened further when a discovery was made at dawn. Not a body, but a photograph, slipped beneath Poirot's own door, a black and white image, grainy and curled at the edges. It showed a young woman in a long veil, standing beside Lady Wilhelmina in the rose garden. She was laughing, her head tilted back, eyes closed. The resemblance to Francesca Lowell was chilling. But the photo, dated 1921, could not possibly be of Francesca. She hadn't even been born then. Poirot turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink: "She doesn't know who she is. Don't let her remember." This was no ghost story. This was something worse. A buried truth trying to claw its way up. Poirot began his inquiries with Francesca. "Mademoiselle, you say you heard laughter?" She nodded, visibly shaken. "Yes, but it wasn't just any laughter. It was familiar, like something I'd heard in a dream. I thought maybe it was my mother's, but she died when I was 3. I barely remember her." "You have no family left?" "None that I know. I was raised in a Boston orphanage. Came to England after receiving a letter from a solicitor claiming I was heir to a distant relative's trust." Poirot leaned closer. "And did this relative have a name?" She hesitated. "Wilhelmina Carroway." Poirot said nothing, but inside, a quiet alarm rang. Next, he turned to Simon Redgrave, the estate manager. "You were also awake during the laughter." Simon's jaw tightened. "I was making rounds. The new security measures. You know how people panic when old estates develop reputations." Poirot nodded. "Yes, especially when those reputations are not invented." Simon looked away. "Look, I heard it, but there's a logical explanation. Sound travels strangely in old houses." "And yet," Poirot said, "you also changed the master key 2 weeks ago, after Lady Wilhelmina's death." Simon's eyes narrowed. "She ordered it herself, said the past was closing in." "Did you ever ask why?" "No," he muttered, "because I didn't want to know." Lastly, Poirot approached Daphne, still trembling from her encounter. "What did you see, mademoiselle?" She clutched her apron. "I didn't see anything, sir, But when the laughter came, I swear I felt cold, like someone walked past me. And the roses, they'd all been clipped from the vase. All of them. Just the stems left. This detail Poirot had not yet been told. The roses, gone from the drawing-room vase. And indeed, when he checked, only the green stems remained, cut with surgical precision. One lay on the floor beneath the side table, forgotten in haste, a thorn streaked with blood. Act 2 began when Poirot returned to the library and re-examined the photo. The laughing woman, a veil, a resemblance to Francesca, and behind them, a stone bench with a very faint inscription. He enhanced it with graphite. For Lillian, who vanished but never left, Poirot requested the estate's genealogical records. Buried in a box among brittle parchment and forgotten wills, he found her, Lillian Carraway, Wilhelmina's younger sister, declared missing in 1921 after a trip to France, declared dead in 1925. No body ever recovered. No explanation. A scandal covered up with silence. Poirot pieced the timing together. Lillian vanished in 1921. Francesca born in 1922. An orphan with no documented parents. Raised in Boston. Now summoned by letter to a manor in which she was unknowingly born. Poirot understood. The laughter wasn't a ghost. It was the echo of a bloodline. A woman whose memory had been erased, whose existence had been denied, but whose daughter had come home. He summoned everyone to the gallery that evening. "You believe there is a ghost," he said softly. "But what is a ghost if not the past that refuses to die?" He turned to Francesca. "You are not an heiress by coincidence. You are Lillian Carraway's daughter. Your mother fled England under threat, and you were born far from the eyes that condemned her." Francesca gasped. Poirot turned to Simon. "You knew. Lady Wilhelmina told you before she died. That is why you changed the locks. That is why you feared the laughter. Because you helped hide the truth." Simon snapped. "I was protecting the estate. If the truth came out, it would have destroyed everything she built." "Non," Poirot said. "Truth does not destroy. Only lies do." He then faced the final twist. "To protect the estate, you also tried to scare Francesca. You planted the photo. You mimicked the laugh. You cut the roses. Your fingerprint was on the thorn." Simon said nothing. "And the desk?" Poirot continued. "The missing item was a sealed letter from Wilhelmina, naming Francesca her rightful heir. You took it, you burned it, but you underestimated the past." He held up a second photo, one Poirot found hidden in the attic behind an old frame. Wilhelmina and Lillian, no veil, no mystery. Sisters. Identical save for a scar on Lillian's wrist, now mirrored faintly on Francesca's. Francesca wept. "I thought I was alone." Poirot stepped beside her. "You were not. And now, ma chère, you never will be again." Simon Redgrave was arrested for fraud and attempted intimidation. No murder had occurred this time. No body, but the crime was just as grave. A life erased, a daughter denied, a bloodline silenced. Poirot stood beneath the rose archway the next morning as dawn broke. The laughter had not returned, and yet it lingered in the stone. "Ah," he said to the wind, "sometimes justice does not come with handcuffs. Sometimes it comes with the return of a name." He turned away, the silence restored. But in the far corridor, where the candlelight danced, the echo of that laughter faded not in fear, but peace. Chapter 9. Silence in the confession box. The priest's hand trembled as he opened the door to the confessional. A gust of cold air spilled out, not from weather, but from something older, something that had been waiting too long. Inside, in the shadowed half of the box, someone had left behind a rosary, its black beads broken, scattered across the wooden floor like a trail leading nowhere. And in the corner, crumpled against the paneling, was the unmistakable glint of blood, not dried, fresh. Father Ellison did not scream. Instead, he knelt slowly beside it, and with fingers that had once blessed hundreds, reached out, only to find the stain wasn't from an open wound. It had seeped from beneath the panel itself, from inside the very walls of the confession box. That night, the priest wrote a letter. He addressed it to one man alone. Monsieur Poirot, please come. Something evil has been whispered here, and now it has vanished into silence. By the time Hercule Poirot arrived at St. Winifred's chapel, the winter mist had crept in low across the moors, clinging to the gravestones like forgotten breath. The chapel, constructed in the 17th century, stood half in ruin, its western tower collapsed decades earlier. But the confession box had survived, untouched by time. Poirot entered it with deliberate care. The scent inside was of old wood, candle wax, and something faintly metallic. He sat on the penitent's side, closed the partition, and waited. Nothing, no sound. But he felt it, the unnatural stillness, the sort of silence that screamed. Ah, he thought, it is always the silence that speaks the loudest, especially when it hides a secret meant to be heard. The victim, though not yet publicly declared as such, was a man named Malcolm Braithwaite, a wealthy landowner and patron of the church, known for his piety and his secrets. It was Braithwaite who had last entered the confessional 3 nights ago, and he had not been seen since. No one reported him missing. He often travelled, kept strange hours, disappeared without notice. But Father Ellison had not seen him exit. And now, a drop of his blood, a rosary known to be his, and a half-burned page from his personal ledger had all been found sealed inside the walls of a box built for sin and forgiveness. Poirot wasted no time. He gathered the people connected to Braithwaite and the chapel. First, there was Father Ellison himself, thin and wiry, a man who spoke softly, but whose eyes seemed always to flicker towards something behind Poirot's shoulder. Then came Clara Braithwaite, the widow, or so she claimed, though no marriage certificate had ever been presented. Beautiful, cold, unshakably calm. Her answers came too quickly, as though rehearsed. And finally, Charles Denham, the chapel caretaker, whose left hand bore a recent burn, bandaged in haste. He said it came from a tipped lantern. Poirot thought otherwise. Act 1 had begun, but the body had not yet appeared. Poirot began by inspecting the confessional itself, a master craftsman's work, built entirely of oak, with panels that fit too tightly and hinges that creaked like whispers. He ran his fingers along the seam near the base. One panel, thinner than the others, had been reattached. Beneath it, he found a hollow space no larger than a man's torso, enough to conceal something or someone if one were desperate. Inside, an old hymnal, its pages soaked in damp, and a small silver pendant engraved with a single initial, C. He returned to the rectory and asked Father Ellison, "What did Mr. Braithwaite confess the night he vanished?" "I cannot say." "Because of the sanctity of confession?" "No," the priest said, after a pause, "because he never spoke. He came in. but there was only silence. I heard nothing. Then why did you not open the door? Because something in me said not to. I was afraid. Afraid of what, Mun? Père? The priest's eyes dropped. Of what he might say. Act 2 unfolded with misdirection. Clara insisted that Braithwaite had written her out of his will. We were finished, she claimed. He accused me of betrayal, but I loved him once. Poirot asked, and did you ever confess anything to Father Ellison? No, she said. Too quickly. Charles Denham had cleaned the chapel the morning after the disappearance. I found nothing, he said, not even blood. No, but your hand, monsieur, it is burned. I dropped the lantern, I told you. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Then why is the oil stain on the vestment chest, not the floor? Denham said nothing. Poirot visited Braithwaite's estate. The study had been stripped, letters burned, drawer handles removed, rugs recently replaced. But in the fireplace, he found a single piece of vellum that had not been fully consumed. On it, a drawing, a cross, but not a Christian one, a secret society, a mark Poirot had seen once before, on the shoulder of a corpse in Marseille. The final clue came not from evidence, but from listening. That evening, Poirot returned to the confessional. He sat inside, in the dark, waited, listened. And finally, he heard it. Not a voice, not movement, but breathing. Slow, ragged. From the other side, he stepped out, flung the other door open, and found nothing. No one. Only the pendant. It hadn't been there before. The letter C, clearer now. Clara, Act 3, arrived with a storm. Poirot called them to the chapel that night. You have all lied, he began, but it is the reason for the lies that interests me. To Father Ellison, you feared what Braithwaite would confess, because he knew about your past, about the boy in Marseille. The priest's face went pale. It was an accident. To the dead, the intention does not matter. To Charles Denham, you burned the ledger. Not to protect Braithwaite, but to erase your name from the list of men paid to silence others. Denham said nothing. Then Poirot turned to Clara. You were never married to him, but you had something far more dangerous. A child. Clara staggered. How did you? Poirot placed the pendant on the table. The child's. The one Braithwaite ordered taken, given away, raised by strangers. He paid to bury that truth. And then, when you tried to bring the child back, he threatened you. I didn't kill him, Clara whispered. No, but someone did. Poirot turned to the confessional. He opened the reattached panel. Inside, Malcolm Braithwaite's body lay folded beneath the boards, hidden for 3 days. A small stab wound beneath the ribs. Not enough blood to stain the walls, but enough to kill. A small knife, used by altar boys to trim wax, still embedded in the corpse's side. Father Ellison collapsed to his knees. He came to mock me, to confess nothing. He knew he was going to expose us all. And so, Poirot said, you gave him silence forever. Poirot did not speak again that evening. He watched the constables carry the body from the chapel. He watched the rain wash over the gravestones. And then he stood before the confessional, alone, and whispered to the dark. The silence in the confession box. It is meant to be sacred, but when filled with lies, it becomes a tomb. And every tomb eventually speaks. He walked out into the storm. Behind him, the candle in the confessional finally died. Chapter 10. The bell rope was cut. The bell tower was silent when it should have screamed. That was the first sign. The second was the discovery of the severed rope, cleanly cut, left to dangle like a snapped lifeline against the cold stone. And the third came with the scream from below. It wasn't the bell that announced the murder that morning. It was the housemaid's voice as she stood beneath the tower, staring up at the rope still swaying in the wind. "There's blood on it," she whispered. "God help us. Someone's cut the bell to hide the sound." Poirot arrived at the foot of the tower just past 7. The morning fog had barely lifted, and the light was thin, grey, uncertain. A constable led him up the spiral staircase, their footsteps echoing with eerie precision. At the top, the wooden platform creaked with each step. There lay the bell mechanism, untouched, but the thick hemp rope, usually fastened through the trapdoor to the chapel floor below, was coiled, like a dead snake in the center, severed 2 feet above its tether. Poirot knelt to examine it. His fingers brushed the fibers. "A blade, sharp and clean," he murmured. "Not torn, not frayed. This was no accident." He stood, his eyes drawn not to the mechanism, but to the window, cracked open, facing the forest. A gust of wind fluttered the torn edge of the rope, and on the sill, almost invisible in the frost, was a partial print. 3 fingers, gloved, but the pressure still present. "So," Poirot said softly, "they came not to ring the bell, but to silence it." The body was found later that morning in the chapel crypt. Annabel Carroway, 28, a cousin, recently returned from Paris. Her body was curled against the stone tomb of Lady Wilhelmina, her eyes wide open, mouth ajar in a soundless scream, and around her wrist, a sliver of the same bell rope, tied tightly as if she had tried to pull it in her final moments. But the rope had not answered. It had already been cut. Father Ellison, pale and shaking, confirmed what Poirot already suspected. "She was to confess this morning. She asked me yesterday, said it was urgent. Life or death." His voice trembled. "I never thought—" "You thought wrong," Poirot said, not unkindly. "And now, she is dead." The suspects were 3, each with ties to Annabel, each with secrets too tightly wound. There was Margaret Folliot, a distant relative, keeper of the family's finances, whose patience with Annabel's extravagant lifestyle had visibly frayed. Cold, calculated, and fond of saying Annabel was a liability with lipstick. Then came Julian Talbot, the estate's archivist, whose quiet devotion to Annabel had long since turned to bitterness. Spurned affection and whispered debts had soured his loyalty. And lastly, Theodore Marchland, the heir apparent, a man with the face of nobility and the heart of rot. His relationship with Annabel was rumored, volatile, and recently severed. She had written a letter, left unopened, on his desk. "I know what you did. I'm going to speak." Poirot began his inquiries at the bell tower. "The rope," he said aloud, to no one in particular, "is a symbol of warning. One does not cut it unless one fears what it might summon." He visited Margaret in her drawing room. She wore mourning black, though no tears touched her eyes. Annabel was troubled, she said, swirling her tea. She made enemies wherever she went. Yet she stayed, Poirot said, because she thought herself untouchable. Was she? Margaret hesitated. Perhaps not. Next came Julian, hidden among books and ledgers. Poirot asked, "You were once close with Mademoiselle Carroway?" Julian smiled, tight-lipped. "She used people, but she used me least. And yet you argued with her 3 days ago." She accused me of spying. I suppose I was. For whom? Julian looked away. Who else? Margaret controls everything. And finally, Theodore, you received a letter from her. You did not open it. I didn't need to, he said coolly. I knew what it would say. Which was? That she'd found out. About what? He smiled. If you knew, you'd be in danger too. Poirot frowned. I am always in danger, but I am not always wrong. Act 2 brought the first twist. A second rope was found, hidden beneath Annabel's mattress, new, unused, untied. And a note with it, when I ring, come, quickly. She had planned to use the bell, planned to summon someone, but who? Poirot found the answer in the chapel register. 3 names had signed in for morning confession: Annabel, Margaret, and Julian, but only one came. Father Ellison confirmed it. Only Annabel arrived, alone. But someone was already in the crypt. The door was ajar when I returned. Poirot pieced the timing. Between 6:15 and 6:30, the bell rope was cut. Between 6:30 and 6:45, Annabel was killed. She never had the chance to ring. Then came the red herring. A bloody knife was found in Julian's quarters, wrapped in a handkerchief, Annabel's initials embroidered. He confessed immediately. She gave it to me, he whispered. Said it was for protection. I didn't kill her. You hid it, Poirot said. Yes. Why? Because I was afraid of who did. The clue Poirot had missed was not the knife. It was the length of the cut rope. The ends did not match. A piece had been removed. Poirot returned to the crypt. Beneath the tomb's edge, he found it, soaked in wax. A candle had been melted around the rope. Ritualistic, symbolic. He understood now. Act 3 began in the chapel. Poirot gathered them before the altar. Fog curled around the stained glass. The silence was oppressive. You believe Annabel died because she was weak. But no, she died because she found strength. He turned to Margaret. You feared exposure. She had found the forged accounts, the siphoned funds. You planned to frame Julian. Margaret stiffened. You can't prove that. I don't need to, Poirot said, because I know who helped you. He turned to Theodore. She was pregnant, he said flatly, with your child. Gasps. You told her to get rid of it. She refused, so you made sure her bell would not ring. Poirot stepped to the altar. The bell rope was cut by Margaret, but the murder was yours. Theodore lunged, then stopped. Poirot whispered, You silenced her, but you forgot one thing. He held up the wax-covered rope fragment. Inside, pressed into the soft wax, a fingerprint. Theodore's. He was taken without a word. Margaret watched him go, her face unreadable. Poirot stood alone in the tower. He looked down at the broken rope and softly said, When a warning is cut, a tragedy follows. But the truth always rings. The bell was repaired, but no one dared ring it again. Chapter 11. A smile at the funeral. The first thing Poirot noticed was the sound of laughter. Not loud, not manic. Soft, nearly inaudible, but wholly out of place. It came from the back pew, just as the priest recited the final Latin prayer. The Carraway family had gathered in full black at St. Winifred's Chapel for the burial of Annabel Carraway, but among the bowed heads and pale faces, one guest had smiled. And not the sad, pained smile of grief, but something colder. Poirot turned just slightly, and through the half-lit candle haze, saw it. the upward twitch of a man's lips. Not grief, satisfaction, as if death had settled a debt. He leaned toward the grieving widow. "Madame Marchland," he whispered. "Who is the man in the grey coat at the rear?" "The one who smiles." Lady Marchland blinked slowly. "That's Victor Lytton, Annabelle's solicitor." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Then he should know better." The coffin descended slowly into the earth. Poirot did not look away, not at the coffin, not at the rope, but at the faces, always the faces. And Victor's did not mourn. It measured, it weighed, and it anticipated. Annabelle's death, while officially declared suicide, had left questions, too many for Poirot's peace. She had been found in the chapel crypt, curled at the foot of Wilhelmina Carraway's tomb, with a scrap of bell rope in her hand and a single note in her pocket. It was supposed to end with her. No one knew what she meant, but Poirot had his suspicions, because things never end where they are supposed to. After the service, Poirot wandered the graveyard in silence. Mist clung to the headstones, curling in skeletal fingers. He traced the carvings absently, his mind racing. The smell of damp earth, the clatter of boots on gravel, and again, that whisper of a chuckle. This time, from behind the yew tree, he turned. No one there. Inside the manor, the mood had shifted. Not mourning, tension. Something unspoken charged the air. Lord Marchland drank too quickly. Clara Braithwaite, the estate's legal adviser, hovered too near Victor Lytton, who politely declined a glass, but watched everything. Margaret Folliot, who had not spoken since Annabelle's death, now sat quietly by the fire, clutching a letter. Poirot sat beside her. "You did not cry at the funeral, Mademoiselle Folliot?" "No," she said flatly. "Annabelle wouldn't have wanted tears." "No?" Poirot mused. "And what would she have wanted?" "She'd want them afraid." This Poirot did not ignore. Act 1 had passed. The death, the funeral, the smile. Now began the search. He requested the key to Annabelle's room. Her perfume lingered in the air, violet and citrus. Her vanity untouched, save for a single envelope in the drawer. It was addressed to Poirot. Inside, a letter, ink faded, written in haste. "I know the bell rope was cut. I know why. And I know who gave the order. If I die before I speak to you, look at the family's will. The original, not the one they want you to see. The family's will." Poirot wasted no time. He asked Victor Lytton for it. Victor smiled. "Annabelle always had a flair for drama. But the will, monsieur? I have the current one. Updated a month ago. Signed by Wilhelmina and countersigned by Theodore Marchland." "Curious," Poirot said, "because Wilhelmina died 2 months ago." The smile vanished. "The update was filed late," Victor replied. "But not signed late," Poirot answered. Victor said nothing. He left the room. Poirot remained, alone with the fire and the silence. Act 2, then, was misdirection. Poirot visited Clara Braithwaite. She sat by the window, pale and still. "I tried to stop it," she said, "but no one listens to a woman who stands between money and murder." "Who did you try to stop?" "I can't say." "But you know?" "Yes." "Then you must tell me." "If I do, I'll be next." Poirot leaned closer. "Then let me speak for you." And so she did. She had witnessed the night the will was forged. She had watched Victor enter the study with a page folded in thirds and leave it sealed with Wilhelmina's ring. Only one person had access to that ring after death. Theodore Marchland. He confronted Marchland that night. Forgery, Marchland sneered. You have no proof. But I will, Poirot said. Annabelle left it for me. That shook him. Later, Poirot returned to the chapel alone. He moved to the confessional, where he had once heard silence become murder. And beneath the floorboards, as he had guessed, was the original will, unsigned, but dated 3 days before Wilhelmina's death. In it, the estate was left not to Marchland, but to Annabelle completely. She was silenced. By who? The rope had been cut, the bell muted. The murder committed beneath the very nose of God. Act 3 began with the confrontation. Poirot gathered them in the drawing room. You all believe Annabelle's death was her own decision, he began. It was not. He turned to Victor Lytton. You forged the will at Theodore's request. In exchange for what? A seat on the board, Victor said calmly. That's not illegal. No, but framing a woman's death to cover a murder is. He turned to Theodore. You killed her. No, he snapped. Yes, Poirot whispered. You lured her to the crypt, promised her peace. She trusted you. She always did. No proof. Poirot raised the note. She wrote this. She told me everything. He walked to the fire. The bell rope was cut. The same bell that would have rung had she screamed. You made sure of it. You smiled at her funeral, because to you, it was over. Poirot pulled the final card. You see, Annabelle survived. For 5 minutes after the attack, just long enough to hide the real will in the confessional, just long enough to write your name inside the altar Bible. In blood, he handed it to the constable. Theodore collapsed. Margaret wept. Clara turned away. Victor said nothing. Poirot stood in the chapel once more that evening, alone, and then he smiled, but not with satisfaction, with sorrow, because the laughter he had heard that day, the smile at the funeral, it wasn't joy, it was victory. Ah, he said softly, sometimes the dead do not haunt us. They simply watch and wait for someone to finish their story. The bell was fixed, and this time, when it rang, the sound carried farther than it ever had before. Chapter 12. The echo that solved everything. It was the echo that shouldn't have been there. A sound that returned not once, but twice. Soft, delayed, like a footstep heard just after the one that made it. The chapel stood empty, the service long over, but Hercule Poirot stood frozen in the center aisle, his sharp eyes narrowed toward the altar. He had just spoken aloud, and the echo, delayed by exactly 4 seconds, had repeated him. Not in his own voice, but in someone else's, fainter, female, breathless. It said, "It wasn't supposed to be you." Poirot did not move. He turned his head slowly toward the carved wooden balcony that circled above the chapel's nave. The air was cold, with late autumn frost. Shadows curled like tendrils between the pews. His hands were still, but his mind moved like a blade through silk. "Non," he whispered. "Not an echo, an answer." The final funeral had just ended. The 11th body in 12 weeks. Lady Marchland, dead from a fall down the chapel stairs, declared accidental. But nothing about the angle of the body or the direction of the blood had satisfied Poirot. She had been found beside the bell rope, severed and retied. Her fingers grasped the very knot that had hung limp when Annabelle Carroway was murdered. It had come full circle, and Poirot had seen too much to believe in coincidence. He returned to the confessional one last time. He sat in silence for 10 full minutes. At the 11th, he whispered into the dark, "Why did you run?" And again, that echo, this time not a voice, but a breath. Poirot's fingertips traced the panel between the booths. The wood here had been replaced. New, unvarnished, a single nail, different from the rest. And beneath the kneeler, tucked inside the hollowed-out footrest, he found it, a dictaphone, set to trigger with movement. He turned it on. The recording hissed. Then, footsteps, a door opening, and then, unmistakable, Annabel Carraway's voice. "You promised no one else would die. That was the deal." A pause. "Don't touch me." Another pause. Then a second voice, muffled, male, steady. "You shouldn't have come back." The recording stopped. Poirot replayed it. 3 times, Annabel had confronted someone in this very chapel before her death. Someone who knew the murders weren't over, and she had been betrayed. Poirot gathered the final 3 suspects, the last living, threads in the Carraway bloodline. The first, Clara Braithwaite, wounded, evasive, carrying a truth too heavy for her own conscience. She had once claimed to try to stop the killings, but she had never said whom she tried to stop. The second, Julian Talbot, archivist, scholar, manipulator. He knew the estate's secrets better than anyone, and he had controlled the records that erased Annabel's claim to inheritance. And the third, Victor Lytton, the solicitor who had smiled at the funeral, a man whose name appeared only once in Wilhelmina's journals, a footnote, a shadow. And yet, he had orchestrated nearly every change in the estate's legal standing in the last 5 months. Poirot laid the dictaphone on the table. "I have heard the truth," he said quietly, "but now I must see it." He began with Clara. "You said you warned someone, but you lied. You were warned." I don't understand." "Non, madame. You understand perfectly. The letter you burned, Annabel's, you thought it would protect you. She threatened everything. No, she exposed everything." Poirot turned to Julian. "You buried records? Forged the registry? Lied about the night Annabel was born?" Julian said nothing. Poirot stepped closer. "You're not a Talbot. You're a Marchland. Illegitimate. Wilhelmina's secret. Hidden to preserve the estate's honor." "Which I did," Julian said, voice tight. "I preserved it." "No," Poirot said softly. "You owned it. Through death. Then finally, Victor, you arranged the trust. You rerouted assets. You delivered forged wills under the cover of legality. But more than that, you orchestrated the deaths." Victor blinked. "Murder is a strong word, and justice is stronger." Poirot reached into his coat and removed the original will, recovered from the chapel's crypt, a secret Wilhelmina had tried to protect, one that left everything to a single name, Evelyn Fairfax, still missing, presumed dead, and Annabel's closest friend. "She came back," Poirot said, "disguised, hidden, watched you all. She was the woman in green. She was the voice on the tape, and she was the final threat." Victor's jaw clenched. "She died." "No, she vanished." Poirot turned, and from the shadows stepped a woman with a scar down her cheek, eyes sharper than memory. "Eveline. She spoke only once. You killed her. But you will not silence me." The room held its breath. Poirot spoke last. "You see the echo? It is not just sound. It is the truth returning, delayed, distorted, but inevitable. Victor was taken. Julian followed. Clara wept. Finally, the manor emptied, the candles in the chapel burned low. Poirot stood at the altar, watching Evelyn kneel where Annabelle had died. He whispered, "La justice, elle ne meurt jamais." It echoes, always. And then the bell rang. Once, and this time it echoed for the last time.